So I'm joined by Alasdair Howorth, in my opinion, one of the most knowledgeable, if not the most knowledgeable, uh, football journalists when it comes to African women's football and in general, actually African football all around. So I'm very, very happy to be joined by him to recap the group stages of the Wafcon 2024, and also look ahead to the knockout stages. Um, of the Wafcon coming up ahead. We're starting with the quarterfinals on July 18th and July 19th in four different cities. Alasdair, we've played, I believe, 18 matches, 45 goals. Do you have one main takeaway over of what you've seen over the last 7 to 10 days?
One main takeaway, I think for me, probably the biggest takeaway kind of coming into this tournament is last tournament at 2022 AFCON was a tournament of firsts, right? It was like the first time Morocco got to the final. No one had even heard of their whole team, and they suddenly reached the final and were excellent. You know, it was the first time Banyana actually won the tournament after 4 or 5 final attempts and kind of this whole journey of being, the second place team in Africa for, 2 or 3 decades. It was the first time that we'd ever seen, the Copper Queens actually become kind of a big team, beating Nigeria and getting to the semifinals, taking South Africa to penalties. So that was it. And we also, we didn't see a lot of the big name players. We didn't see any of, the stars. Whereas this tournament, it's all been about the big name players. There was a huge question of Barbara Branda. She's making her WAFCON debut finally. She's the new face of African football. How is she going to cope? 2 minutes in, she's already scored. Ghislaine Chebec, she was the emergent star in 2022. Is she going to step up? She scores a hat trick. So it's just been a huge kind of moment of growth and explosion. Even Asisa Oshuala, who's not who she once was, um, immediately scores just a couple minutes into her first game. So I think for me, that's been it. Is the big names, the big teams stepping up.
I didn't really think about that. It's true that there was a lot of emergence in the last WAFCON, but it's true that this one sort of just it lived up to what we were all kind of expecting, right? I mean, even if you look at the teams that have qualified to the quarterfinals, can we talk about the emergence of like an established elite top four, top five of teams? If we talk about, Nigeria, South Africa, maybe we could throw Zambia in there, maybe Morocco as well. You think that that is the case that um we could talk about like with the men's side, and I hate that I keep referring back to the men's side, but sometimes I would say like the fact that we have 9.5 spots now at a World Cup, I think that there's not much separation between those first 9.5 or 10 teams on the men's side. On the women's side, where do you think that line is? Do you think we're talking about 4 or 5 teams, something like that?
Yeah, 100%. And it is those big four. And again, what's remarkable with the women's side of it is how quickly that's been established, right? Because from 1991, from, the first Women's World Cup all the way through to really 2018, really is just Nigeria, just steamrolling everyone. Obviously, there's that brief period where Equatorial Guinea kind of reached 3 finals in a row and win two of them. And even it's not really until 2018 that kind of finally South Africa kind of, they scratch away at that kind of surface of Nigeria. They lose in the final, but they outplay Nigeria. They only lose on penalties, and then they beat them in the Aisha Buhari Cup in 2021. They then play them in the opening game of 22, and it establishes. So we knew going into the 2022 AFCON that South Africa and Nigeria, they're the big ones. They're going at it. And then, like I said, suddenly Zambia and Morocco come out of nowhere, and it's so quickly established this top four. These are the big ones. They go to the World Cup. All of them impress. I mean, Morocco, South Africa, and Nigeria all get out the group stage, which from Morocco's perspective, they lost 6-0 in the first game to Germany, and they still got out. Even Zambia, yes, they didn't get through, but they beat Costa Rica. They win their first points. They go to the Olympics. So suddenly, absolutely, there's a very established big four. Ghana, I think, would have a shout out for being maybe a fifth team that can slide in. They've reached quarterfinals. They could get to the semifinals. Obviously, they play Algeria. So I think, they might have a bit of a resurgence because they were a big side for most of that time that Nigeria dominated. But it is very clearly just those big four have become the elite, and there is a huge gap between them and the rest.
So let's go very briefly group through group before we start talking about the quarterfinals. Group A, we have Morocco finishing top of the group with 7 points, Zambia second with 7 as well, and Senegal third. They also advanced to the knockout stages with 3 points. Following along the themes of what we've been talking about, when I look at the goal scorers, I see, Epissam Juraidi, Rezan Shevak, Yasmin Marab. These are like the sort of big names. And even Zambia, when you look at their big names as well, you see Banda, you see Kundananji, and even like players like Chilufia and Chanda, the big names from Zambia have impressed again. Um, I hate asking repetitive questions, but what was your takeaway? Was it just like that the people that we expected to step up did step up? Any thoughts on Senegal, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, in many ways it was. It was like, okay, we knew coming into this group, Zambia were a chaotic team, not very defensively structured, but they have arguably the best attack in the world. And that's exactly what's happened. Against Morocco, we saw absolute brilliance of Barbara Banda and Kundananji. And that second goal, under the cosh, Zambia under so much pressure, just launch it up. Barbara Banda chests it down under pressure, immediately slides it through to Kundananji. Like superb, but they're chaotic at the back. And again, Morocco, we know they're big names. We know Shabak is such a talent. We know they've got Tekdout and Razraoui, and even Traidi, I think, has been the big change from that 22 side, is they now have a real lethal goal scorer. I think
Number 9,
with,
yeah.
and yeah, exactly. And with Senegal, I remember watching Senegal in 2022 and being really impressed. They were in Morocco's group. They came second. They lost 1-0 in that game as well, and they also lost this time to Morocco 1-0. But what Senegal have is they've got a really physical team. I think particularly Sek, kind of in that anchor defensive midfield role. She has been excellent both tournaments. But now they've got this really electric front three. Ngana and Ndiaye, Mama Diop, and Hapsatou Diallo. Diallo blew me away in 2022, and she was just 17, electric pace. But the other two have been the ones who've stepped up. Diop scored that brilliant goal in their first game against DR Congo when they smashed them 4-0. And Ndiaye scored 4. So I think for me, the big disappointment from this group was DRC, because obviously this is a team backed by a core group of players from Tiki Mazembe who won the CAF Champions League.
Kind of a group of vets, all right? I mean,
100%. This was always the group of death, because like with a 3-group tournament, you've got 4 big teams. There's always going to be one group that is going to be killer. And then I think Senegal and DR Congo arguably were the strongest 3rd-seeded teams in the competition. So it really was the group of death. But it kind of, again, played out as we expected it. Morocco and Zambia going head-to-head. And then it was kind of a battle between Senegal and DRC. And I'm really excited Senegal got through, because I don't think they are a team that should have been knocked out in the first round. I think they are amongst the kind of best of the rest. So I'm excited that they actually get through to the quarterfinals, because I think they thoroughly deserve it.
yeah, I agree with that as well. Moving on to Group B, we have Nigeria finishing top of the group with 7 points. Algeria with 5. Botswana finished 3rd place with 3 points, but they do not proceed to the knockout stages, and Tunisia pick up a single point and finish last. This was a group, I think, that was maybe didn't really it maybe bucked the trend a little bit. I think maybe we were expecting slightly more dominance from Nigeria. They had to wait for a last-second goal to beat Botswana. They couldn't put a goal past Algeria. Um, I think there's maybe a little bit of disappointment radiating from the Super Falcons camp. You could tell me if you agree with that. And then what have your thoughts been about Algeria? Just 1 goal in 3 matches, but they've conceded none. So alongside Nigeria, the best defense in the tournament so far.
Yeah, I think with Nigeria, right, is any other team in the world, I think men's or women's football, you come out of a group, top of a group, undefeated, 7 points, no goals conceded. Everyone will be happy with that. The Super Falcons, no chance. Like, there's already kind of baying for blood and calling for Madugu to be sacked, to kind of huge frustration. I think with Nigeria, but it's again, it is the same old issue we've seen with Nigeria, right? They have this incredibly strong side, incredibly disciplined. They have, for me, the best back four in African football, in particular their fullbacks, Alozie and Plumter, are fantastic. But they lack that kind of craft and that creativity. And we've seen that, in the first game, they got a set piece goal against Tunisia early on. Oshwala scored in the 4th minute. That opens up the game. But when Algeria, when Botswana kind of can hold off that first onslaught, they really struggle. I mean, Algeria, I think they had 24 shots and I think 1 on target. They really kind of are a labored kind of team going for it. Obviously, for that one, they had rotated. But there's huge questions around, Oshwala up front, because she's not the player she used to be. And she's shown that she's sluggish. She's not quite as sharp as she once was. But then there's big questions about, for me, particularly who's playing alongside her. I think Rinsola Babajide has been excellent on that left wing. Esther Okoronkwo hasn't started yet, but has always been really good coming off the bench on the right. So there are options. And I think if I was a Nigeria fan, I wouldn't be upset, because these are the teams, they're all going to play in low blocks against Nigeria. They're all going to sit back. Morocco won't do that. South Africa won't do that. Zambia will do that to an extent, but less so. So there's a sense that, okay, Nigeria are playing the type of teams they hate playing. And actually, once there's more space, once their physical dominance can come into play, that's when I think they shine a lot more.
But do you think they found their best 11? And if they haven't after 3 matches, is that a sign of worry? Is that a little bit maybe what might keep them up at night after, we're into the knockout stages now. They still haven't really clicked fully.
100%. And I think that was the big frustration, is we saw in that first game, it almost was like the result papered over the cracks because they won 3-0. So it's hard to argue, oh, this has not been a good performance. But for me, there's certain positions that they had not nailed down. I think one, Deborah Abiodun, she kind of came in a couple years ago at the World Cup really as this kind of creative player. But since she's moved to the US where she now plays in the USL, she's actually really regressed technically, I think. So she's now become a bit more of a, aggressive box to box midfielder, which is not what they want. And then they've been persisting with Rashida Ajibade as a number 10, which for me is not her best position. I think she's one of the best players on the continent, but for me, she has to either be in that, number 8 box to box position or even out wide. I think she's quite a good kind of hustling winger. Whereas for me, and what blows my mind is at the World Cup, we got the perfect formula. It was Ajibade was kind of playing on the right as an auxiliary kind of midfield winger, and Tony Payne was playing in the middle, and she was excellent, particularly in that game against England. She was really, really good. But then they've not stuck with that. They've shifted her out wide. So for me, I think, and for a lot of followers of the Super Falcons teams, there's certain players that I think should be starting. Nailed on. Babajide should play. Okoronkwo should play on the right wing. For me, pull back Ajibade. But Justin Maduga doesn't seem to want to do that, and I'm not sure why. But yeah, like you said, he's tinkered. He's made a lot of changes. He's been able to rest a lot of players. His back five is sorted, but it's that kind of midfield in that area behind Oshuala that they don't have the answers really.
I see. And just a quick note about Algeria, a team that really didn't start any players from the domestic league. They have their sort of legendary striker, Naima Bouhani, on the bench, but she has been injured. I don't know if she was fully fit, if she would have started, but I do feel like they played some pretty decent football against Tunisia, against Botswana, passing the ball very well in midfield. But then just it's almost kind of like lack of an end product. I mean, obviously, if you only score one goal in three matches, that seems to be the case. But I don't know if Bouhani returning that would make a difference or not. But that definitely seems to be a problem for Algeria as well. Any thoughts about any of the other 3 teams in Group B?
Yeah, I've been really impressed with Algeria, and I think actually they probably are the biggest surprise of the tournament. I think coming into this tournament, we knew Nigeria would win this group comfortably, and then it was a question of Botswana, Algeria, Tunisia. Tunisia, obviously were at the last Wafcon, did fairly well in that, got out of the group stage. Same with Botswana, but have been on a downturn. Obviously, one of the quirks of this tournament being delayed by a year is that the Wafcon 2026 qualifiers have already started. So Tunisia came into this tournament already knocked out of the 2026 edition by Kenya, which was an amazing kind of performance from Kenya to get through that. But so you kind of have a sense that Tunisia are on a downward turn. Whereas for me, I was really impressed with Algeria against Botswana. And in particular, you say that, yeah, they only scored 1 goal. That goal is like, for me, it was my favorite goal of the
Very
tournament.
well.
Just like lovely ball into the channel. Boutaleb kind of latches onto it, their hut back. Karchouni with the kind of late run into the box. So for me, Algeria have shown that they are defensively resilient. They do concede very few chances in terms of going like when they're defending. And I think for me that's all right because they've actually gotten away with it. Because obviously we've talked about before that the quirks of the group stages, it means Nigeria have a much worse draw. Algeria will play Ghana, and Nigeria will play Zambia. So I think for me, that really opens up Algeria. I would fancy them against Ghana. Ghana will be the favorites, no doubt. But they've shown that they can keep it tight at the back. And they've got those kind of sprinkling of quality, whether it's Karchouni, I think Busaha provides that a bit. Boutaleb in flashes has been all right. So I think, for me, actually, Algeria have been the big impressors in terms of this tournament.
Very well. Moving on to Group C, we have the defending champions finishing top of the group there. No surprise. 7 goals and one conceded. 7 goals scored and 1 conceded for Banyana. Ghana finished second. Mali finished third with 4 points apiece. They both qualified to the knockout stages. And Tanzania, even though they put in some decent performances, unfortunately finished bottom of the group. I think they just came apart in that last match against Ghana with some injuries. Do you think that South Africa have lived up to their billing? I think people were a little bit worried after the Tanzania result, the second match of the group stages, but that 4-0 drubbing of Mali in the final group stages to sort of put maybe worries to rest. What do you think about South Africa's performance so far?
Yeah, South Africa are weird, right? Because obviously they're the champions. They have, for me, the best coach on the continent. Although I mean, obviously Jorge Vilda's kind of maybe changed that coming into Morocco. They've got this kind of golden age of players all peaking, all potentially some of them maybe having peaked a couple years ago actually. But coming into the tournament, there was so much negativity. Tembi Kgatlana pulled out of the team for personal reasons, which is a huge loss because she is, for me, I think arguably one of the best players in Africa. I put her on the same pedestal as Banda and Kundananji and Oshuala. And then we've had all of this huge issues with the South African Federation, the local league in South Africa, which does provide the bulk of this team, hasn't been playing regularly for most of the season. A lot of the teams have played hardly any games. Most match weeks, there's only one game on, if any. They boycotted training, the over unpaid bonuses. Desiree Ellis, the coach, for me, the greatest coach in African football history, yeah, on the women's side, is without a contract going into this tournament, which is just abysmal. So for me, actually, I think they've actually done really well given all of that. And yes, it was a labored performance against Ghana. Yes, it was a very poor performance against Tanzania, lacking creativity. But it was in this game, like you said, that they really stepped up against Mali, because I think with Banyana, they don't have the best players. I think Nigeria, Morocco, and Zambia can kind of point to that. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the support like Morocco does. But when it clicks, this is the team. For me, that is the biggest embodiment of Shushan and Piano in South Africa.
That's a bold claim, but I like it.
But like you see it even like in this game, I saw 3 or 4 times Dlamini, Karabo Dlamini, and Felike Magama. They're fullbacks doing like flicks and tricks in the air. Lovely little 1-2s, particularly when Sasani didn't play in this game, but when she's on the pitch, she does that. So for me, that was this game. Is they showed actually we still are a serious team, and a lot of their big players stepped up. I think particularly Hilda Magai. It's great to see her starting again. She didn't start in the first game. Rafilia Jane, again, brilliant free kick to give them the lead. So I think for me, there are still big question marks over South Africa because of the issues they've had, and they still have a glaring issue, which is set pieces. Because even when Mali came close to scoring it with set pieces, and obviously they play Senegal, who are a physical team, which I think is kind of goes against South Africa. And if they get through that, obviously either Nigeria and Zambia, who both have shown that they've got that kind of physicality. So for me, Zambia kind of recovered after or South Africa recovered after a fairly poor start, but I think they'll be happy with where they are coming into this, because they were in a difficult group. Ghana and Mali are no slouches, and Tanzania, obviously they went to the U17 quarterfinals. They knocked out Ghana and Canada on the way. They're missing 1 or 2 players, but they've still got a really strong squad. So I think South Africa have actually done well to come out of it unscathed.
So let's look ahead to the knockout stages. Nigeria, Zambia. I think probably the toughest match of the knockout stages, right? It's one that's probably difficult to predict. History tells us that probably Nigeria should be favorites. Zambia are the continent's best newcomers. They probably have the players that are most in form at the moment. How do you see this one going? Because it seems like Nigeria are going to get a team that's going to finally go at them a little bit. So that might open things up. But how do you see it going?
Yeah, it's such a finely balanced game because right, you say that, but I think as we saw in that Morocco game with this back five that up till his
Can be or better on the break and transition, kind of. Is that what you said? Yeah.
exactly. So I think if anything, they are of the 4 big teams or the 3 other big teams, they're the ones that I think are best suited to play Nigeria. But then on the flip side, Nigeria are the best suited to play against Zambia, because unlike South Africa and unlike Morocco, Nigeria's center backs in particular and their fullbacks are incredible athletes, and they can keep up with Barbara Banda. They can keep up with Kunananji in a way that I don't think Morocco and South Africa could. So I don't think it's going to be an exciting game. I know Zambia have been the kind of neutrals team because they are so brilliant to watch, because they are absolute chaos at the back and are brilliant going forward. But I think for this one, there's almost an element of canceling each other out, where it's, Zambia are happy to defend and Nigeria will struggle to break them down. But at the same time, Nigeria are really well equipped to defend. And, I think they've got players like Halimatu Ayinde, who just sits in front of that defense and is so physical, so strong that, Hunananji and Barbara Banda are going to struggle to get change out of her. So for me, it is obviously, it's the best quarterfinal by far. I'm really, really glad it's not next tournament, because if so, one of these teams wouldn't be going to the World Cup, which for me would be a huge disaster. But I think it is, it's going to be brilliant in terms of the spectacle. And I can't wait. I'm going to be there on Friday. So I'm really excited for that to be my first game at the tournament, because I think it will be excellent.
Yeah, what a way to start your Wafcon. Unbelievable. Does Mali have a chance against Morocco? It feels disrespectful asking that question, but just the pressure, packing the stadium, the expectations. What do you think? Yeah, I think Morocco are favorites. I don't think anybody's going to argue that, but Mali do have a chance, maybe?
Yeah, I think they always have a chance. They've got decent players, particularly going forward. Diarra didn't start in the last game, or Disa Diarra, but I mean, she plays up front for PSG. They have these players. Say with Samaka there, who scored that in that first. They've got players who can cause Morocco problems. But I think, as we mentioned before, Morocco at the last WAFCON, they had a very easy route to the final. And they really labored to get to that final, which is understandable because it's their first time at the tournament in 24 years. But they really struggled to break teams down. And it was all, a set piece from Shabak, a penalty, this, that, and the other was how they broke them down. For me, Morocco are different now because Shabak is still has improved, if anything, as we've seen already in terms of her output this tournament compared to the last. Tagnout had a slow start to this tournament, but has looked excellent. Wazraoui has been kind of the big addition on that right side to complement her. And Draidi, as we mentioned, is the kind of game changer up front, is someone who actually shows a goal threat. Whereas Ayan, I've interviewed her. I'm a big fan of hers. She's a very willing runner. She's an excellent presser, but she's not a lethal forward. And that's what Draidi is. So for me, Morocco are the heavy favorites. I think for me, this is probably the most unbalanced of the group games. I think Morocco are heavy favorites. But you never say never. And obviously there's always a tension as a journalist because you want to see the upset, you want to see Mali do well, but also for this tournament's sake,
Yeah, you want to need a hope nation.
get to the final.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree, yeah. Algeria versus Ghana, the most likely to go to extra time? Maybe with Nigeria, Zambia. I don't know.
Yeah, I think those two are competitive, but yeah, for almost different reasons. They're kind of two tiers of where that competition is. I think this will be a good.
Well, Ghana scored 5 goals, but they scored 4 in the last one against Tanzania. I mean,
Yeah, and two of those were kind of like constantly, goals right at the end when they'd already broken down Tanzania. There wasn't kind of a sense that they'd created. But I would say on the flip side, they were so tremendously unlucky not to score against South Africa. They were really good in that game. I think actually South Africa's first goal to penalty was very much against the run of play. And while South Africa then the pitch opened up and they kind of cut through them for the second goal, Ghana did create chances. They hit the bar, they hit the post. I think for me, the big issue with Ghana is they kind of have this amazing crop of attacking players, but none of them have really grasped this tournament by the scruff of its neck. I would say maybe the exception is Chantal Boyhorka, who's had a brilliant game against Tanzania, goal and assist. She was player of the match.
everybody's expecting Evelyn Badu to sort of be that player.
And exactly. And she in those first two games really struggled, particularly in that first game against South Africa. She didn't really make any impact. In this game, she came off the bench and scored. But for me, I think, yeah, that's where the issue is. I think Alex Kusi has been really good, but aside from that, it's kind of a toss-up for who's going to play up front. Bordeaux, if she's fit, probably will, but Adubea came in and scored here. So none of them have really kind of grasped that opportunity. Whereas I think Algeria is kind of the same, where, you've had a bit of rotation. You've had them playing kind of different players coming in. Talib Muller's come in for the second couple of games instead of Boutaleb. Haven't been blown away by her. Obviously, you'll have kind of a bit more of an insight on the Algerian side. But for me, Ghana will be the favorites. But I think similar to the Nigeria-Zambia game, I think Algeria will be really happy to play on the break, really happy to absorb that pressure. And yeah, it could easily kind of be a 0-0 going to extra time, going to penalties. I think that is very much on the cards for this.
And as much as they set up defensively and they play conservatively, they also have a very good goalkeeper, which I think is a huge asset in this tournament. Chloe Ngazi maybe hasn't been tested so much because, as you mentioned, Nigeria, I think 23 shots off target of the 24, but she is a tremendously reliable goalkeeper. So I think, and she has a lot of height, and so I think that could definitely be an asset when we get to the knockout stages. Finally, South Africa versus Senegal. Senegal, as you mentioned, a tricky side with some talented strikers, a lot of size as well. So maybe there could be a problem on set pieces. We still consider South Africa to be the favorites?
Yeah, 100%. And I think what South Africa showed us, I think at this tournament, but also in the 22 edition, is where we've seen South Africa at their best when they're playing the best teams. The last tournament, it was in that opening game against Nigeria, and it was the final against Morocco. They just played them off the park, were excellent. They've shown in the other games in these tournaments that they do struggle similar to Nigeria with rhythm, with kind of fluency. And I think, again, Senegal have a real strong kind of physical presence, which South Africa really struggle with. And we saw that at the World Cup when Sweden and the Netherlands kind of took them apart, mainly just off set pieces. South Africa were their equivalents when actually playing on the ground. But as soon as it became a physical aerial game, they struggled. So for me, South Africa have shown that they struggle against these defense sides. But at the same time, what South Africa have really impressed me with at this tournament in that game against Ghana, but also in 2022, is they have the air of champions. And, and it's that sense of they don't play the best, they get through the games. They don't play the best, they get a goal. And for me, they've got so many weapons. That's why I think they are such a good team. Unlike Nigeria, unlike Morocco, unlike Zambia, they're not going to have one player score four, five, six, 7 goals. But Seopo Senwe is going to chip in. Magai is going to chip in. Rafile is going to chip in. Linda Motlalo is going to chip in. So for me, I think South Africa are still the favorites. For me, Senegal, can they, in the same way, kind of how you get at Nigeria, you stop South Africa playing, you stop them playing, because when they play the best football by a mile at this tournament. They play some brilliant football, but if you stop them doing that, that's when you can kind of get into them. And the longer this game goes, the more of a problem they can make. And like you said, they've got that front three of Diallo and Jai, who do cause a lot of problems. So for me, South Africa will obviously be the favorites. I think the other thing we have to keep in mind is South Africa are staying in Wichita, where they've been playing all their group games.
Yeah.
So they have to travel from Casablanca. So I think that does kind of play in South Africa's favor in terms of preparation. So they will be the favorites. But I think that one in terms of the big teams against small teams is the one that, okay, maybe something could happen here.
Alistair, thank you. Before I let you go, one final question. What's been maybe one thing that you've enjoyed the most about this tournament so far? And one of the things that maybe you've been disappointed with in this tournament? Put you on the spot.
That's yeah, that's hard to say. I mean, I guess for me, the disappointment is obviously it's a disappointment playing in smaller stadiums and around the country. I think what made the last tournament so good is it was just in Rabat and Casablanca, and they were playing in the national stadium in Rabat. When you've got, for me, that semi-final between Nigeria and Morocco was the best atmosphere a women's game has had anywhere ever. It was amazing. 60,000 Moroccan fans trying to cram into the stadium that only is meant to have 45,000 or whatever it is. So I think that's been disappointing. Obviously, the attendances have been good at the Morocco games in the Olympic Stadium, but it's, a third the size, really. So I think that's perhaps has been a bit of disappointment in terms of the kind of level of energy has kind of been a big disappointment. For me, I think in terms of what I've enjoyed, I think for me, and it's, a bit lame to say, I guess, because we already talked about it, but it's seeing the stars step up. Because like we said, at the last Wafcon, there was a sense for me of like, there's a lot of these players I don't know who are doing really well. And this is really exciting, being introduced to players like Hapsatu Diallo, who really blew me away, and I think particularly that group with Uganda, there was also quite a few in that team. I was like, okay, these are me. Whereas this, like, particularly at first game, like just seeing Barbara Banda play, because for me, I was in 2022, I was there when there was the whole scandal of her not playing, like going to the Zambia team hotel, seeing her, not being able to interview her, being, trying to speak to the president of the Zambian FA and being blocked. And it was such a frustrating thing to see Zambia not have these players and not have them. And same with Oshuala, in that first game in the last Wafcon, she got injured really badly in that first game against South Africa. And it was a huge kind of disappointment. So I think for me, that has been the big thing, is just finally getting to see the biggest players, with the exception of Hatlana, playing on the biggest stage in African football and thriving.
That's so, so, so important, really, to have like not just an elite number of teams, as we've mentioned, emerge, but an elite, really, crew of players that become marketable, that become well known to the wider general public, not just in Africa, but beyond it as well. Alistair, I'm going to thank you for joining me. If you aren't following Alistair for some reason, you can follow him on the social media, find it in the description below. Subscribe to his Substack if you haven't done that as well. Or you could also find him on the On the Whistle podcast, where they cover African football just as in depth, if not even more in depth, than we do here on the African Five-A-Side podcast. So do make sure you follow Alasdair Howorth. I'm sure you enjoyed this conversation, and I'll speak to you all very soon. Peace.